Hello, this is Professor Joseph Holbrook again. I'm going to be continuing my discussion of early indigenous civilization in South America, particularly with the Inca Empire, one of the greatest empires in all of history, according to some scholars. So let's jump into the material. This is for LAH 2020, Introduction to Latin American Civilization, which I'm teaching in person in the spring of 2023 at Florida International University in the history department. So I had to discourage my cat from jumping in my lap. Sorry about that. So the Inca Empire was the greatest state ever seen in the Andes. I already talked about the Wari and the Tiwanaku, but it was the shortest lived. It began in the 15th century and lasted barely 100 years before being smashed by Spain. Even in 1350, they were still an unimportant part of the political scene in the Central Andes, and they were newcomers. In one of the oral tales, the Inca originated with a family of 4 brothers and 4 sisters who left Lake Titicaca and wandered until they came upon their future Inca capital of Cusco. And I've got a nice picture there. That's a picture of Cusco. According to a widely quoted chronology from a 16th century cleric, there was a war with the Chanca that broke out in 1438. The Inca leader at this time was Wiracocha Inca. He was a tough guy. He talked like a warrior. But when the Chanca invaded, Wiracocha Inca fled in front of the Chanca with 3 of his 4 sons. His youngest son, Inca Kusi Yupanaki, refused to run and stayed to fight. He fought the Chanca with such bravery that, according to the legend, the stones rose up in admiration to join the fray and fight on his behalf. Inca Yupanaki won the battle, capturing many Chanca leaders. The humiliated Wiracocha Inca went into exile, while the Inca Yupanaki returned in triumph to Cusco and renamed himself Pachacuti, World Shaker, and proclaimed that the ruling Inca families were descended from the sun. After taking the reins of state, Pachacuti spent the next 25 years expanding the empire from central highland Peru to Lake Titicaca and beyond. Here's a picture of the main plaza in Cusco. The Inca masonry was so extraordinary that it amazed the conquistadors, who could not understand how they put together such enormous stones without mortar and without draft animals. It was astonishingly durable. The U.S. explorer Hiram Bingham photographed the citadel of Machu Picchu in 1913 and found it in near-perfect condition despite 4 centuries of neglect. At the heart of the new Cusco was the plaza, which this is a picture of it, the plaza of Acaypata. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Acaypata. 620 feet by 550 feet. It was carpeted almost entirely with white sand carried from the Pacific, and across the facades, the stone facades, ran enormous plates of polished gold. In Pachacuti's grand design, Acaypata was the center of the empire and the cosmos. From the great plaza radiated 4 highways that demarcated 4 asymmetrical sectors into which he divided the empire, and he called it Tawantinsuyo, the land of the 4 quarters. Not only did Pachacuti reconfigure the capital, but he reconfigured the institutions. The economic system functioned without money or markets. The economists would predict that this non-market economy, which was a type of vertical socialism, should produce gross inefficiencies. The Spanish invaders were stunned to find warehouses overflowing with untouched cloth and supplies. So whatever insufficiencies or inefficiencies that existed resulted in surplus, not want. Tawantinsuyo managed to eradicate hunger, possibly the only time in history that a centrally planned economy has successfully eliminated hunger. The Ruma Suni. When Tawantinsuyo swallowed a new area, the Inca forcibly imported settlers from other faraway areas and gave them land. To communicate, both groups, the resident locals who've been conquered, plus the imported colonists, were forced to use Ruma Suni, the language of their conquerors. Ruma Suni was basically the Inca term for Quechua. In the long term, it would have eroded distinctions among cultures and forged a homogeneous new nation in the imprint of Tawantinsuyo. 5 centuries later, the wholesale reshuffling of populations became an infamous trademark of Stalin and Mao. If Pizzaro had not interrupted, the Inca might have created a monolithic culture as enduring as China. I would also mention that this was also a strategy of the Syrian Empire, one of the first empires of history in the Fertile Crescent, who conquered nations brutally and removed them and relocated them in a similar way as the Incas. That's where the famous quote about the lost tribes of Israel comes from. There were 9 tribes of Israel that disappeared when they were conquered by Assyria and forcibly removed. So the question arises, how did Pizzaro carry out this conquest? How did he do it? Anyone who studies this history is confronted with this question. The empire was populous, rich, well organized as any in history. There is no other empire that ever fell to such a small force. Pizzaro only had 168 men and 62 horses against one of the greatest empires of history. How did he do it? And there's several theories about this. But before I get into that, a little more history. Thumpa Inca inaugurated the Inca custom of marrying his sister. Thumpa Inca sent his armies deep into Ecuador and Chile, doubling the size of Tawantinsuyo around 1493. In terms of the area conquered during his lifetime, he was in the league of Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan. His death set off a fight over the royal throne, and the winner was Huayna Capac. Tawantinsuyo did not have strict succession rules. Instead, the Inca selected the son he thought most qualified. Thumpa Inca had more than 60 sons from all of his wives. He apparently selected one son, but then changed his mind on his deathbed and selected another. That was probably a big mistake. The first son was banished or killed, and the second son took the name Huayna Capac and became the ruling Inca. Because the new Inca was still a teenager, 2 of his uncles served as regents. One uncle tried to usurp power and was killed by the other uncle. Eventually, Huayna Capac grew old enough to take the reins, and among one of his first official acts was the killing of his two of his own brothers to avoid future problems. It's always better to head off future problems than to have to solve them after they have arisen, right? Although that's a bit of a brutal way to do it. So here's a picture of the Incan Empire at its greatest extent in 1493. And here's a picture, some pictures drawn by Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, who was half Incan himself. and it's the closest thing we have to documentation about the Incas from an Incan. This brings us to Atahualpa, and you may notice I spell it. There's several different ways to spell it, and so in history I've learned one way of spelling it, but the book tends to use a different spelling. So around 1520, Juan Capac marched to Ecuador at the head of an army, and a little bit of drama ensues. Once he got there, he had been born in Ecuador. Once he got there, he was kind of overcome with nostalgia, plus he was a little bit, I guess, ready to retire. So he brought one of his teenage sons with him, Atahualpa, and he ordered a magnificent palace to be built for himself in Cuenca, Ecuador, and sent Atahualpa out to command the troops and do the fighting. He liked his new quarters so much that he stayed on there while Atahualpa and the generals went out to subjugate a few more provinces. The unfortunate problem was the peoples that they were trying to subjugate were from the equatorial forests. They weren't mountain indigenous people from the mountains, and they did not belong to the Andean culture system and were not interested in joining. So they fought ferociously in the jungles. Caught by an ambush, Atahualpa was forced to retreat. Enraged, Juan Capac prepared himself as quickly as possible to go in person. He left his pleasure palace and publicly berated Atahualpa at the front. But unfortunately, he got knocked out of his litter and fell onto the ground, and that was a huge humiliation. He delayed his triumphal return to Cusco for 6 years, but suddenly in 1525 he got sick and died in his Ecuadorian retreat. And on his deathbed, he seems to have passed over Atahualpa. I guess he was still pissed at him, and designated his heir a son named Ninan Cuchi, who died of the same illness just before Juan Capac did. So that was a poor choice. Next in line was a 19-year-old son named Huáscar. The high priest subjected this choice to divination, and they learned that Huáscar would be dreadfully unlucky. Actually, they were all about to be unlucky. So civil war seemed inevitable between Atahualpa and Huáscar. Relations between them spent several years swinging back and forth between concealed suspicion to overt hostility. They finally broke out into a civil war, which lasted for 3 years, and it seesawed across the Andes and was particularly brutal. Huáscar's forces seized the initial advantage, invading Ecuador and actually capturing Atahualpa at one point, although he then escaped. Now this is all setting up the scene for the appearance of the Spaniards. Here's Huáscar, and here's a picture of the Inca being carried on his litter. So, this is the picture of the Battle of Cajamarca in November 1532 between 168 Spaniards and Atahualpa's army. So what happened was that the Inca Empire had been devastated. I'm going to cut through some of my notes here and make this a little quicker. The Inca Empire had been devastated by smallpox, and estimates are that about 1 out of 2, or about half of the residents of the Incan Empire died of smallpox. And then they had a civil war. So smallpox, civil war, this set up the Inca Empire to be vulnerable to attack from without. And the Spaniards arrived around this time. They invited Atahualpa to attend a banquet in his honor at Cajamarca. When he arrived on his litter, the Pizzaro and the Spaniards took him prisoner and agreed they would release him if he would fill up several rooms full of gold. and silver, and he agreed to do that. And so you see here a picture on the lower right of a room being filled with gold. They said they would release him if he paid this ransom, but once he successfully paid it, they strangled him instead. Never trust a greedy European, I guess, is the lesson of this story. So, how did they do it? How did they conquer, with so few men, conquer one of the greatest empires in history? The chapter, if you get a chance to read it, by Charles Mann, goes into some detail about the military technology. The difference was not as great as one might think. The Spaniards did have steel, they did have horses, they had attack dogs, and that worked in their favor. But the military weaponry of and also the just forgot the name, the armor, the cotton armor that the Incans wore was stronger than one might think, and more effective. In fact, a lot of Spanish soldiers gave up their steel armor and started wearing the cotton armor of the Incas because it was much lighter, and yet it was nearly as effective in its protection. And so 168 men dealt a devastating blow to the greatest empire on earth. Was it the steel technology? Was it the horses? Not really. And the book will go in a lot of detail about the bolos and the slingshots of the Incas and how effective they were. The bolos, they could twirl around and cast them around the legs of the horses, bringing the horses down. They could kill the horses, so the horses were not quite as effective as one might think. Also, there was, let me get this picture. Also, the Incan roads, because they did not have horses, and llamas were capable of walking upstairs or down. The Inca roads were instead of having switchbacks and being flat, were built with stairways. And horses could not effectively navigate stairways. And so the Incas learned to attack the Spaniards when they were moving up one of these hills, these stairwayed roads, or down, and the horses were not effective. So there's a number of reasons why the military discrepancy was not as much as one might think. The basic answer of why they were able to do it, why the Spanish were so effective in defeating one of the greatest empires ever to exist on Earth, was disease. And the chapter goes into some detail estimating the number of inhabitants and the number of deaths. And the basic information is that there were 80 to 100 million indigenous people living in the American hemisphere when the Spaniards arrived. And after a century and a half of constant disease, smallpox, viruses of other kinds, basically 9 out of 10 Indians died. This first wave with the smallpox, at least half died. And so the answer to how they were able to defeat this empire was because it was sick. The whole empire, almost everyone in it, was sick with smallpox and dying. Their foundations were shaken. They were in the middle of a civil war. And so it was fairly easy for the Spaniards to walk in and defeat them. Smallpox broke out in 1524 and was so severe that more than 200,000 died, and it spread to all parts of the kingdom. The smallpox killed Juan Capac. It killed his son and designated heir, his brother, uncle, sister, wife. And of course, we know that the Civil War then basically preoccupied Atahualpa and Huáscar. And of course, most of the main generals of the officer corps died. So this is the explanation from the book, is that Pizzaro and the others got lucky and arrived at just the right time to find the indigenous people, the Incas, at their weakest point. So the conclusion of the author is the Incas were not defeated by steel and horses, but by disease and factional division. And this led to an implosion, demographic implosion. The first 130 years of contact, about 95% of the people died in the Americas. I think they're including the North America there. According to a 1999 estimate, the Earth's population at the beginning of the 16th century was about 500 million. If these figures are right, the disease claimed the lives of 80 to 100 million Indians by the first third of the 17th century. All these numbers are at best rough approximations, but it appears that the epidemics killed about 1 out of every 5 people on Earth. According to one geographer, it was the greatest destruction of lives in human history. And so that concludes my presentation of the rise of the Incan Empire in Tawantinsuyo. Next week we will continue with the encounter between Europeans and indigenous peoples with the arrival of Christopher Columbus and the early efforts at colonization in the Caribbean and later on the mainland. Thank you so much for your kind attention and your interest, and we will continue next week. Take care. Bye.